class is here, and we've been discussing the book and some of the chapters, and you know which sections that they have been reading about. And so the class might have some questions for you. So I'm going to turn the camera around, and for all of the class here, this is David Schel, the author of the book that you've had the opportunity to read. And thank you, Mr. Schel, for the books. So I'm going to turn the camera around and let the class ask you some questions.
Great.
Okay. So if anybody has some questions, go right ahead, and I'll point the camera at you if you have a question for Mr. Schel. Yeah, right up there.
So my question is, do you think that as a child of course, if you had a better relationship with your siblings during the situation, if it would have affected like your adulthood or anything like that, or just a child in general?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all the question. Are you?
So let me see if can you hear me okay? Maybe hear
Yeah,
me.
I hear you perfect, Julie.
Okay, so if I have your question right, you're asking, do you think if his relationship with his siblings was better, would it affect his adulthood relationships better now?
Yeah, like during
I think so. I think absolutely. You know, the siblings are, you know, in some senses, for lack of a better word, a team. And so I think the more that they can stick together, and obviously, you know, each one experiences divorce different, just like each, you know, three siblings can live in the same household and all experience a different household. So they all experience the divorce differently, but I think that the more the siblings can stay, you know, bonded and close together, I think that definitely affects, you know, how they go into adulthood.
Okay, one question over here in the middle. Yep.
So in your research, do you have any findings on whether it is more difficult for an adolescent to grow up from a divorced family or from a single parent family? Because on page 33, Schel states he didn't fight, like the dad didn't fight to have him with me. And I feel that many single parent children have that same feeling that the parent didn't fight for them, so maybe it's even more similar.
Yeah, okay, so if you didn't get all of her questions, she's asking, do you think that it's more difficult for a child of divorce to grow up than a child of a single parent family? And then you referred to a quote, and the quote was about, Gil was saying
that the dad didn't fight to have.
Oh, because the dad didn't fight to have Gil, and so maybe feelings of betrayal were in that quote. So maybe Gil felt like, you know, my dad has betrayed me. So the overall question that I'm getting is it harder for this child to grow up in this divorce situation than just in a single parent situation?
I think that's a really interesting question. You know, I would, off the top of my head, I would say they're obviously equally challenging. Obviously, in the divorce situation, you know, I think there's all sorts of single parent situations. So there isn't kind of a one size fits all. You know, there can be a single parent situation where the, you know, one parent was never in the picture right from the start. Or there was a, you know, can be a single parent situation where there was a parent, you know, in there for part of it. The divorce in general, you know, both parents were a part of a child's life, you know, for the entirety, at least until the divorce. So I would probably say, you know, it's harder for the child to go through the divorce. The single parent, like I said, you know, not that there's a one size fits all, but you know, when you've known some, you know, I guess kind of better to have loved than lost and never to have loved at all. But I would say that the inverse of that, in that, you know, if you don't know what you're missing, you can't miss it. You miss the idea of it, and you have a kind of fantasy of what it is, versus in the divorce, you assuming, you know, you kind of know what you're missing. And then you're obviously, unfortunately, can be involved in you know, the tug of war, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really fascinating question, and I don't know that there's a real easy, simple, you know, yes or no answer to that. I think it so much depends on circumstances. Does that answer your question?
Yes, she said thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? So, oh, yep, go ahead.
So, obviously, like, in this time for this, like, divorce wasn't as common, but do you think parents have gotten better with, like, co-parenting, or it's still, like, a really big issue that needs to be worked on?
So her question was, in the book, like when Gil was a child, divorce may not have been quite so common. Since that time, do you think that co-parenting, people are getting better at that, or have they improved somewhat at co-parenting, or are they not as good?
Again, that's another very interesting question. I think that obviously there's so much, there's much more of a body of work, sadly, because there's so many out there. So I think yes, people. I guess I think co-parenting has gotten better without a doubt. There's also kind of an interesting kind of twist on that. There was a study done at the University of Texas where they're finding that the kind of quote-unquote good divorce is leading to more divorces. So the children of these kind of quote-unquote good divorces, they're getting divorced as adults at higher rates because they see all this positive, great outcome. And so it all looks like a wonderful outcome. So then their kind of threshold for dealing with problems in their adult relationships becomes lower and they get divorced quicker. So the co-parenting, like I said, in a lot of regards, obviously it's better. But at the end of the day, I think it probably is maybe better for the parents. I don't know that it's necessarily better for the kids. I think they probably see it as better just because there are so many more of them, versus years ago where it's not that it wasn't as prevalent. You just kind of didn't see it as much. It's so much more out in the open now.
Thank you.
Again, I think what's happened, even in some of the questions that you've asked, I think unfortunately there are no kind of simple, easy answers. So much depends on circumstance, and and every parent is wired different. Every child is wired different. I think so many right now. So if you look at the parents now, they've come out of kind of the divorce generation. So many of them grew up as children of divorce, and they kind of have had a script and a way that they kind of expected, hoped, thought that their marriages would go. And so I think there's so much pressure to kind of mask the problems and put forth this good divorce.
Super, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, question up there.
Is it common, like, for me to after affected children in divorced families to blame themselves because you blame yourself for them splitting up and also blame yourself for your parent?
So her question was, is it common for the child of the divorce to blame themselves? Because she brought up the example of to the grandpa dying.
Blaming yourself, like, I revisited the grandpa, he was like, I can't believe that I went and saw him, and 2 days later
right.
he died right after.
Yeah, so Gil in the book is feeling like a lot of guilt and blame, and then even after seeing the grandpa in the hospital, then he leaves, and then the grandpa dies. And so is it common for children of divorce to feel a lot of that guilt and blame?
Yeah, sadly, I think that is a very simple, straightforward answer, and I think that is unfortunately timeless, in that whether it was 40 years ago or 40 years from now, likely, I think children blame themselves, whether they say that, whether they do it consciously or subconsciously, they blame themselves, and I think a lot of that, probably they're not aware of. And probably a lot of that is not on the surface and kind of sits in there. And I know that, I think you've been reading about sleeper effects and things along those lines. And I think so much of that comes out, in later in life. And so I think that blame is a very, very big issue. I think it's a timeless issue. I think children have always and continue blame themselves, and that's a really unfortunate occurrence. And I think it manifests itself in many different ways, as you can see in Gil's life later on.
Thank you. Yeah, one question here.
So if Gil's parents had stayed together, how would that have affected his life in a different way?
It's a good question. So if Gil's life had stayed together, how would that have affected his life in another way?
Well, I mean, obviously, you never know what you never know. I mean, you know, there's forks in the road every day, and we never know what's down the other fork in the road. But in all likelihood, you know, Gil would have had a much stronger bond with his father. I mean, you know, and so that could only have resulted in good things. So I think, you know, Gil just set out on this course early on. And again, it's a little different today, but, you know, back, you know, years ago, and when Gil was going through this, he set out on a course of hiding and secrets and lying to kind of, I know you've been discussing, you know, social reality, and to fit in, or to, not more important, you know, not fit in. And so, you know, had his parents stayed together, that never would have happened. And so, you know, you don't know how exactly he would have turned out, but that whole pattern in his life that continued into young adulthood, continued into adulthood, continued into his, you know, marriages and relationships, that whole pattern of this desperate need for belonging, this desperate need to fit in, never would have happened. And so, you know, I can only surmise that, you know, better things would have happened in his life.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Missed you way over there. See your arm. Yeah.
So in class, we were discussing 4 different types of parenting styles. So Gil's parenting style seems to mirror that of like neglectful parenting style. Would you say that a specific parenting style could influence the rates of divorce, and whether children from parents with, let's say, a neglectful parenting style fare worse than those from a permissive parenting style?
Okay, so her question is about parenting styles. We've been talking about parenting styles in class, and she's saying that it seems that Gil's parenting style seems to be neglectful. So do you think that a different parenting style might influence the outcomes? Was that your overall question? Like Gil's outcomes, or?
Like just in general, so like, would one parenting style affect the rates of divorce over another? And would a child who comes from a parent who has a neglectful parenting style fare worse than from another style?
So do you think there's a parenting style that might affect divorce rates more than the other? So like, you know, authoritative parenting style or authoritarian, are neglectful parents maybe contributing more to the divorce rates? Is there a parenting style you would think?
I would have to say that, and I don't know that this would fall into necessarily a particular parenting style, but, you know, in any household, so in any marriage, in any household, in any parent-child relationship, there are always problems. Problems will always exist. Life will always throw you curveballs. You know, it's what you do it's what you do with those problems. It's who you are. Are you someone who solves problems, or are you someone who kind of lets problems get the better of you? And so, especially like in a marriage, are problems going to, you know, cause you to turn on each other or to work through them? So I think that happens in parenting styles as well, because, you know, kids clearly will always have problems, and they're looking to their parents to either help solve the problem or help guide them towards solving the problem. And so, you know, if you're problem solvers to begin with, then I think that affects your parenting style. And I know that's not necessarily a parenting style, but I think, again, a difficult question to really put an absolute answer on. Because, you know, there are so many parenting styles, and you know, there are, you know, success and not success in all of them. Again, you know, each child, each young adult, each adolescent, all wired different. You know, we all have, 2 ears, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and yet we're all entirely different. And so, like I said, I think it's more some of the kind of conceptuals than the actuals, if that makes any sense.
Okay, thank you. Yes, one here.
Questions, but I don't know if it's like, what was the story? Like, was the story based off of a specific person, or like separate, like a bunch of separate people combined into one story? Because I know he's like the founder of like Kids Against Divorce, so I don't know if like the story was inspired by different stories all merged into one, or one specific story.
Okay, so she's asking if the story was based on one specific person's experience. She was saying that she knows you're the founder of Kids Against Divorce. So is it a conglomeration of several people's stories all put together? So she's asking more about the writing of the story itself.
Yeah, the story is based on the actual events of my life. And so that's kind of, the story as a whole is what drove my passion to try and work towards strengthening marriage and reducing divorce in our country. Right now it continues to, it continues to hover around 50%. There are some who say closer to 40%, but either way, 40 or 50%, it's, still in that neighborhood. And a large driver of that right now is the lowering of marriage rates. Marriage rates are at an all-time low and trending lower. There are several sociologists out there who predict that, in the next 50, 60, 70 years, marriage could become obsolete. So there was a passion in me based on my life's experiences to really do something for, and I look at your age group. I imagine probably half of you have, come out of a childhood of divorce, and you're all about to, enter into adulthood and either marriages or relationships. Probably, I'm venturing to guess, most want to have kids. And so, at this point, we really are kind of at a crossroads. Are we ever going to really address this problem? And it's a very difficult problem. Obviously, a problem of, say, heart disease. You have to obviously it's medical technology, it's advances in research. This is such a more intangible, and yet it's a tangible. There are so many tools available today to help struggling marriages. And I think probably right now, again, it's kind of coming back to that social reality concept where, it's the culture of divorce. And so even kind of going back to, one of the earlier questions, there's way more emphasis today on trying to become good co-parents than to trying to kind of fix the marriage and just kind of being parents. And so I think, it's really, I wrote this book because I'm kind of hoping it is really impactful. It's enlightening. I think right now, there's a lot of kids your age, younger, I think older, that are still hurting. And I think that because divorce is so common, it's almost kind of treated like the common cold, that you're expected to just kind of get over it and move on and be resilient and all these kinds of concepts. And I think there's just a lot of pain underneath that, again, kind of those sleeper effects that come out. I think that there are a lot of kids who, are from, who are children of divorce, who have good grades and do good in school and all sorts of things, and there are kids who don't. And there are kids from divorce who go on to have great careers, and there are kids who don't. But it all comes out in their adult relationships. And that, I wouldn't say is a fact, but it's pretty close to a fact. That, that basically, unless we kind of have a change in culture, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And more kids, and adults for that matter, will continue to suffer.
All right. Well, we are at the conclusion of our class, David. So thank you. We want to all thank David for being in our class today. Thank you very much. And thank you for answering all of our questions.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and thanks for
Yeah.
taking the time to read the book. And
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll
Okay.
see you soon.
Okay, bye, Jill.
All right.
Bye.